Welcome to another episode of the Empowered Half Hour. And I am bringing you today someone I'm so excited to interview, like genuinely, just in the pre talk. I got the goosebumps. I'm like, yes, this is going to be a good one. All right. So let me bring it to you. I have today Tinna Jackson. She is the CEO of Jackson Consulting, and she is the author of the Power Play Journal. And her book is beautiful. You'll see some images in the show notes. But Tinna, welcome to the show.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Becca. I'm so happy to be here with you today.
I know. I'm like, let's get into it. So, you guys are going to learn about Tinna as I do, but I just know from us getting to know each other a few minutes before we hit record that there's some similarities and some parallels and some passion areas that are very similar. So, Tinna, I would love to ask you question number one. What's your backstory? How did you get to a point of wanting to produce a book, start a consulting agency, and your book, but not to mention, is a bestseller now and also received an award. So you're
Mhm.
passionate about all this. Like, how did you get here?
Yeah, it's an interesting story for sure, for sure. So I am actually born and raised in Washington, D.C., and I'm still here. This is where my business is. And I've had a really, really interesting upbringing. I grew up with four older brothers. I'm the daughter of a Marine who met my mom in the Philippines when he was stationed. And growing up in DC back in the 80s was really, really tough. It was a tough time with everything that was going on with the drugs invading neighborhoods and so forth. And my escape at the time when I was a teenager was through art and reading and being very, very diligent about my work, about my schoolwork. And then when I finished high school, I wasn't sure that I was going to go to college. I got into, because I was so artsy, I got into cosmetology. So I went to cosmetology
Oh,
school.
nice.
Yeah,
See,
so I went to
I wouldn't have known that.
so I went to cosmetology school, but as I was doing that, I also maintained a day job. And I was working for a law firm that also did lobbying. And a gentleman there decided that he was going to take me away from the firm and take me to Capitol Hill because he was leaving the firm and he was going to go work for this congressman once he won his Senate seat. And I'm just listening. I'm like, whatever, politicians, whatever, they're full of it. But the guy ended up winning. And my friend, he came to me 3 times. He said, Tinna, you've got to meet this guy. I think you'd be great to work with him. And I asked him, I said, why do you think I'd be so great? I'm just a secretary. At the time, that's what we called assistants.
Yeah.
Back in the day was secretaries. And I said, why are you bugging me? Like, why is this so important to you? He said, because you don't cut any corners. He said, you are serious about your work. I love your work
Wow.
ethic. And you tell the truth no matter how people feel. And you do it in a way that's so subtle and it makes people move. You get stuff done. And I was like,
Ooh.
oh, okay.
Yeah, I was like, I
Uh,
like that.
and so I went with him to this reception. I meet the senator and I'm like, oh, he's the real deal. Like, yeah, I'll come work for you guys. And I did. I ended up working on the Hill for a little over 10 years.
Oh,
And then I
wow.
left that. Yeah, that's a decade is a long time when you're in a very fast paced environment like that. You never know what's coming on any given day. And then after that, I did some nonprofit work. And then I ended up with a political committee. And during that time, I noticed a lot of patterns throughout my career. At least the last 10 years, I noticed a lot of patterns. I noticed that people tend to be really, really good at their jobs, right? If you want to be good at your job, you will be good at your job. A lot of the things that were missing was direct training. A lot that was missing was the lack of emotional intelligence and the way to connect with employees from a manager's
Sure.
perspective to get people to be inspired to continue working well. The gap between just in general leadership and all of the employees. And every job I got, I was like, yeah, this is a problem. I wonder what someone's going to do about this. And so when I was with this political committee, in 2017, a lot of folks were going over to the White House. And I said to myself, I know they're going to call me. They're going to call, someone's going to have a problem. Someone's going to have an issue. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to start my management consulting business. I don't know if
Nice.
anything's going to come of it, but we'll make it work. And so I did. And so a couple years later, I decided to step into my business full time because I knew I had something right. Even though I was saying emotional intelligence, people weren't getting it. but I think people are getting it now,
Yeah, I think
right?
it's much more concentrated
Especially,
now than
yeah, especially post COVID. And speaking of COVID, I had two brothers pass away in early 2020 from COVID, literally back to back. When the first brother was being buried, I got the call about the second brother. So the second brother died on the day of the funeral for the first.
oh,
And honestly, like I saw the rest of that year through, but I was like, I'm going to step into this business full time and I'm going to help as many people as possible and I'm going to impact as many people as possible. And so, yeah, I went in full stop with Jackson Consulting Group. I started with, didn't start, but I ended up with a considerable amount of clients to keep me busy. And during that time, I was like, I kept thinking about this book, like, I've got to write this book. I've got to write this book. When I started writing it, it was over 400 pages. And the publisher was like,
yeah, like we need a
lady,
cut.
this is
Yeah,
not a
right.
textbook. Because in my mind, I was like, oh, this is going to be a textbook. People need to learn this stuff. And then I said, no, what I'm going to do is I'm going to write it in a way where every manager, anyone who is in the process of thinking of managing other people, even if you're managing your household as a mom or managing your relationships, just managing projects or just managing an organization as a CEO, I want people to check themselves. I want people to learn about resilient leadership and then question, have I been a resilient leader? What have I overcome to get to this particular area or this particular place of strength so that I can bring others along and help them as well? So the book is written as a journal with various journaling prompts at the end of each chapter for self-reflection.
That's very cool. And there's so much in all of that opening that I'm
Yeah.
like, I want to touch on. But I think I'm going to take a piece from where you were just wrapping up, and then I want to go back to a
Mm-hmm.
couple pieces. But the one thing that fascinated me at the end was you were using this term resilient leader.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that I've interviewed probably over 100 people, and I have never really heard, we talk about resiliency, and I've had a lot of podcasts on that, but I've never really heard anybody like anchor into the resilient leader. And
Mm-hmm.
that just like caught me. And so I
Yeah.
just want to ask you, like, I love that you mentioned whether you're leading your house or you're leading an organization or you're leading. So what would you say are qualities that you see in a resilient leader? Like, how would you describe a resilient leader?
I think resilient people are honest. They're honest and they have a high level of integrity. And they also have a level of self awareness and recognition of what they're going through. When you can accept what you're going through, the likelihood of you pushing past it, I think, is very high. Even if it's accepting what you're going through and recognizing that I can't do this by myself. Maybe I need a coach. Maybe I do need to go to therapy. One therapy session won't hurt. It actually helps. It actually
Yeah.
helps. It does. It does. And so, yeah, I think it's people that operate with a high level of integrity and acceptance and self awareness. Like they know themselves, they know what's going on, they know how much they can handle. Even though a lot of us handle so much, too much on a level where you start to approach burnout,
Yes.
you
Yeah.
know?
And that's kind
Yeah.
of where I was going, is like with strong self-awareness, you can almost overcome anything, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
you had mentioned losing both of your brothers back to back. Like I can't even imagine. Like I only have one sibling and he passed away last
Mm-hmm.
year, his one
Oh,
year
I'm
mark.
sorry to hear that.
Oh
Mm-hmm.
God, it sucks. But there's a couple things in what you said. Like when my brother passed away, I was in the middle of writing my book with the publisher. And
Mm,
I had to make some choices pretty fast. As like, do I need to break to try to emotionally process what happened? Or am I going to take what just happened and take him with me through this? You know?
mhm,
And so I
mhm.
chose the latter. I'm like, you know what? I feel his presence. I know he would want me to keep going on. And I went. But I think as we relate to what we're talking about, even the loss, and we had talked about in the pre-interview lifing,
Yeah,
I think that we are 10 times more resilient than we give ourselves credit for. And that
absolutely.
you can persevere from losing both your brothers. I can persevere from losing my brother. But I would like to talk about that, like perseverance, a little bit, and
Mhm.
maybe take what you've learned and summarize it in an empowering message for the audience. Like help them remember who they really are, Tina.
Yeah, absolutely. The thing is, loss is inevitable. Whether
It is.
you're losing siblings or parents, even the loss of a job, right?
Right.
We
Yeah.
all go through some sort of grieving process when there's a loss. And so being self aware, just knowing how you're feeling and giving yourself grace to feel those things is okay. When I was still working with an employer at the time that my brothers passed, I was working on a political convention. And that's a very important large scale event during the year of COVID. It was tough. I could have stayed home. I could have stayed home. I could have said, COVID scares me. I had two brothers who passed away from COVID. I'm just not going to do it. Then I heard my two brothers, they were so tough, tough guys. I heard my brother say, girl, stop. You don't need to cry over us. Get your stuff done. Do what you need to do. That's how they were. And I
That's
was
the
like,
same energy I got from my brother too, crazy
yeah.
enough.
And so there was a part of me that became fearless. I was like, screw
Right.
COVID. I am not going to allow COVID to keep me from getting on a plane and working with the team and helping people and helping to see this event through. I think during that process, people were like shocked. I think people saw me like, oh my God, are you okay? I said, yeah, I'm awesome. Now, there were times where I would have to, again, give myself grace to feel. I'd be thinking of my brothers and I would just, even on the plane, I don't know if this happens with you, but when I'm on the plane and I'm in those clouds, I'm like, oh, I'm thinking of my brothers. I hope their soul is okay. I hope
Yeah,
they are where I
100%.
believe they're supposed to be. And so I give myself grace to feel. We are allowed that as human beings. Not allowing that is what keeps you in a very, very sad and dark place. Not allowing that space for yourself.
And I love how you just also talked about like harnessing their spirit for good. I think so
Mm-hmm.
many times we take the loss of whether it's loved ones or you said like a job. And I've been through layoffs, I've been divorced, I've lost loved ones. Like, I mean, loss has become like a thing, but I have learned when you talked about resilience, this is what I was like, hey, let's get into the meat and potatoes of this a little bit because
Mm-hmm.
the one universal thing we all have is we all go through this stuff.
Right.
And like, why can one person come out the other side and another person can't? And like, I often
Mm-hmm.
find it's perception. How are we
Mm-hmm.
internalizing it and what are we doing for it? But if you can think about how can I leverage this for good? How can I take what my brother's attitudes and what they're saying to me? Like, my brother was in sales, like a sales leader. And so I always heard him like in my head go, get back on the phone. That's his way of telling me, like, let's go, girl. You can't sit here and be sad.
Mm-hmm.
You gotta get back on the phone. Let's go.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a very empowering message for someone who still dreams of what they're doing next or thinks like, I've gone through this. Who am I to rise into this next thing? What I would like you to maybe share with the listeners is the outcomes and the positive things that happen when you harness your resilience and then you do turn it into good. What are some of the things that you've seen happen in your life and in the life of your clients?
I think it's important to understand how to reframe a lot of the situations that we go through. I think it's important to reframe, especially when you're dealing with the loss. Like a lot of things don't happen to us, they happen for us. There's a lesson in everything. And I think once you get to a level where you're able to accept and reframe, things get a little easier. I'm not going to bullshit you and tell you that, oh, you just reframe and you just move on. No, it's a process. It's a learning process. It's learning how to think differently all over again and believing those things. Like, I do believe that even though my brothers died during COVID, they didn't die from being shot. They didn't die from being robbed. They died during a pandemic. They were not the only folks that we lost as a country. And so as you're reframing too, I've tried to teach that to my clients. When you're a new CEO, for instance, you're walking into an organization, in your mind, you think you know what you're doing until things start getting revealed on an hourly
Yes.
basis, on a daily basis. You think you know what you're doing. Yeah, sure. Your previous jobs have prepared you for this huge role you're taking on. But when you're dealing with human behavior, and when you are dealing with people that have difficulty trusting and you're walking in as the new person and you want to make all of these changes, you're going to lose that whole team. I try to teach my clients, reframe. Don't walk in thinking that you're the new sheriff in town. Everyone's going to fall to your feet and you're just going to get all this stuff done. Your agenda is going to get pushed through immediately. No, no, bro, no, sis. It's not going to
It
go
doesn't
down that
happen
way.
like that.
It does not. It does not. Does not for sure.
No, but I like that you brought it back to business because we have a lot of people who are highly professional that listen to this, and a lot of people, whether it's a mom or dad, that run households. And I think that
Mm-hmm.
sometimes we get stuck in, I like the CEO example, but I'm also thinking, and the reason I was pausing, I'm also thinking of like parenting and the different seasons of life that you go through. Like you can't
That's right.
parent your teenager the same way you parented them as a toddler, you
That's
know?
right.
And
That's
so
right.
this reframing and reconsidering and reevaluating is just a really
Mm-hmm.
important process. And I don't know if you have anything you want to say off that, but you just got me thinking of like, wow, this is applicable to, I'm going back to that theme of resilient leader. Like this is really applicable across situations.
Yeah, it sure is. Just as a parent, I am not a parent, but I watched my mom try to raise five crazy kids, four boys and one girl as the baby, and it was not easy. She worked a full-time job. My dad worked a full-time job coming out of the military, and there were five kids, and I was a lot younger. Like my oldest brother's 14 years older than me, and so being the youngest and the only girl, obviously she wasn't going to parent me the same way because I was being brought up in a different time than they were. And because my dad was in the Marines, they really didn't have him around. I was the only child that had both my mom and dad around. And
Got
so
it.
we were brought up differently. And so when you think of those different scenarios, you can equate it to what you go through in organizations. Like my mom was trying to parent me from toddler, like you said, toddler to teenager to young adult. There was growth in that process. And if you don't recognize that, you're going to be an angry parent.
Right.
Right? There's going to be a lack of understanding. There's going to be a lack of understanding of why your daughter or your son is not sharing information with you, because maybe you're still seeing them as that 7-year-old child and not the 16-year-old they've become, you know?
I love, no, I am tracking what you're saying and I'm relating it back because I've my highest level of leadership was senior director. And so now I'm like coming back to these roles. And I think that when you also get stagnant in your career, I think that it's
Mm-hmm.
along those same lines as you've started to approach today the same way you did 5 years ago. And so
That's
like
right.
anyway, I'm just seeing like how universal this what you're talking about really is, and like whether you're a CEO or you're a director or you've been in your role for a while and you are
Mm-hmm.
starting to hit that wall, what would you
Yeah.
say to that person?
I would say that the wall is imaginary. The wall is there if you think it's there. It's your mind. It is in your mind. You have to believe in the possibilities more than you believe in your limiting beliefs, I think.
Mhm.
Don't get me wrong, it's hard because we all struggle with imposter syndrome and confidence when we are scared. When we see the vision, we see where we want to be or areas that we might want to step into, but when you start thinking and doubting and you keep looking for that doubt, you will find evidence of it. And it's all in your mind. No one's stopping you from doing anything that you want to do. There's so many resources for us. If we ask, you would, and I'll tell you, the senator I worked for, I learned this from him. He would ask for anything under the sun. He would always say, you never know what people would be willing to do or if they'd be willing to help unless you ask. If you keep it to yourself, if you keep thinking that you could do everything by yourself and put on your Superman cape and your Superwoman cape, that cape gets old
It
after a
does.
while. Once you're re entering the Earth's atmosphere into reality, that cape gets worn out. I think it's important to just be honest with yourself and try to break down a lot of those limiting beliefs, because who told you you couldn't do that?
Yeah,
Who told you
exactly.
that?
I love that you said who told you that because it normally is a who.
It
And that
normally is a
who
who.
could have been from when you were 8 years old and here you are 38 years old and you're letting that wall. You know what I mean?
Oh my God, once you start peeling back the onion and you start digging deep, deep, deep on where that came from, oh,
I
yeah,
know.
it's
I have been like, that was a third grade teacher that I've never talked to ever again. Why is
that's
that like
right. That's
keeping
right.
that wall up? It doesn't even make sense. So it is really cool. It is
That's right.
fun. I know you guys might not think, listeners, that it's fun to peel back the onion, but it is. It's kind of a fascinating thing. So I encourage you to do it.
Yeah.
I want to ask another question. And you shared quite a few lessons so far, but I would love for you to
Mhm.
share an aha that's up for you or like a lesson that is really like up for you right now.
It's interesting. I just mentioned some of it, but this limiting beliefs issue that we all have, I think can be very, very damaging to our psyche, to our mental state, and to where we all could go, possibly, especially when you are on that path to figuring out what your purpose is. I truly believe that I'm working in my purpose. All of the jobs that I've had over the years, and I had to come to this realization, all the jobs I've had over the years, I've always worked for the top person, whether it was CEO or senator, or I've always worked for that top person as an advisor. And so I'm saying to myself, like, I've always been a coach. What am I doing? Why wouldn't I branch out and do this as a business owner for myself and try to get to as many people as possible and let them know that you're not the only one? It was me too, and it's okay. There is a path forward. Let me help you.
I love that. And you said something so powerful. I don't think we encourage the listeners to get your book too, especially since it's a journal and it's going to have a lot of self awareness in it. But just like stopping to see, what is my pattern? What am I good at? Like, what has my career look like? If I was to take that
Mm-hmm.
observer view, look down, like when Tinna looked down on her career, she says, I've always been the advisor to leaders, to the highest
Mm-hmm.
people. Why would I not
Mm-hmm.
do that for myself? Like, that's a
Mm-hmm.
brilliant question to ask yourself and to like peel back that onion on. Similarly for me too, I've realized it took me stopping and asking those questions like, what is my theme? What is my pattern? What do
Mm-hmm.
I enjoy? What am I good at? Who have I helped? Who have I served? But I
Yeah.
tell you, listeners, when you start asking yourself those questions, wonderful things start unfolding for you. And, Tinna, I'd like to turn it back to you and just say, like, how could what we're talking about be empowering for a listener if they were to embrace the messaging?
I think what's empowering is the possibility, right? Of once you start doing some inward reflection and even writing down on, I don't care if you write it on a napkin or whatever, just write down a couple of notes like, what have I been doing? What have I been doing for the last year? Had I stopped doing what is one thing I could have stopped doing that could get me closer to where I'd want to be? Once you start looking at those patterns, look, I am guilty. I go on TikTok. I could spend several hours on TikTok when I'm avoiding an issue. Oh my God, TikTok shop, right? I could spend hours, but if I flip it back on myself, what could I have been doing in those 4 hours that I've been scrolling and avoiding an issue, right? I
Yeah,
could have gotten through that issue and solved multiple problems in that time frame, right?
100%.
And so if you do some reflection and be honest, it's just you and yourself. It's just you, yourself, and your pen and your pad or whatever you're writing on. Just be honest with yourself. What have you been doing? What do you want to do? And think about a potential roadmap for how you could get there. Because it doesn't have to be me, but there are many people out here that are willing to help that can be helpful.
And I love even tying that back to one of the lessons that you shared from, I think you said the senator that you worked for.
Mm-hmm.
And you said there's multiple paths, and you don't know what is possible for you if you
Mm-hmm.
don't start mapping it out, if you don't start asking people for help, if you don't start leaning
Mm-hmm.
on the resources. We limit ourselves based upon what we think they're going to respond with
Yeah.
or how they're
Yeah.
going to perceive us, like that imposter syndrome of like, who am I? So you talked about so many things that I mean, I feel like I could talk to you for like 2 hours and we could just keep going. And I looked at the time, I'm like, sadly, we're coming to 30 minutes early. So what I wanted, I do have one more question for you, but I want you
Mm-hmm.
to share with the listeners first, like how can they stay in touch with you? How can they find their book? Like all of that now goes to you, Tina. How can they stay?
Sure. Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. So I am on Instagram. I am Tinna Jackson. It's Tina with two N's, Tinna Jackson. Also on LinkedIn and the Power Play Journal. It's battle tested strategies and reflections for impactful leadership. Impactful leadership. That is on Amazon and it's also at thepowerplayjournal.com.
That is awesome.
Yes.
I'm going to go over to Amazon and purchase your book because I love
Yes.
this interview and I want to support you on. I love seeing how other people present information to help bring out the best, right? And
Yes. Thank you.
I just feel like you did a good job at that. I don't know, but I feel like you did. I want to play. So, last question. It's really
Hmm.
more of like a statement that I'd like from you. It
Hmm.
is the empowered half hour. What is an empowering message you can leave for the audience?
Yeah. I think that Self-awareness is very important. You may not recognize it right now, but it really is the cheat code for loving yourself and loving others, honestly. I think that once you become more self-aware, the floodgates open. No one will understand it until they get to that place. Once you know more about yourself, you can regulate your emotions and you can manage all of your relationships so much better. Because when you get upset, you do have choices. You could choose to crash out and go off, or you could retreat and say something like, I need time to think about this. I'm not in a good place to respond right now. And that's okay.
Ooh,
You
yes,
can
it
give
is.
yourself
It's
that
so
grace.
powerful.
It is okay. I get upset a lot. I've got to think for a second, especially if the person you're talking to and dealing with, if that relationship is important to you, you will find a different way to respond. If
I
it's your
love
parents,
that.
if it's especially if it's your kids, because I don't know that parents are fully aware of how powerful their words are
Oof.
and how kids, as a kid, I just remember carrying a lot of tapes with me in my head from both parents that
Yes.
still stick to me this day. I'm sure you have a few where parents have said certain things to you and you remember them to this day. And it
Oh,
affects how you function. It affects how you function as an adult. It really does, which also contributes to some of your limiting beliefs.
right. That's why I went back to the third grade teacher when we were talking
Right.
about earlier. I'm like, I'm playing a tape from a third grade teacher who doesn't even remember that I exist, and here I
That's
am
right.
30
That's
years
right.
later.
That's right. Absolutely.
So great. That was beautiful and such an empowering message. I just want to thank you so much for coming on and being a guest. It was an absolute pleasure to interview you, and I hope we keep in touch. Thank you for being our guest.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed it.